Welcome to A Slice with Dice, a podcast exploring the ideas, pressures, and possibilities shaping how we learn, lead, and grow. I'm Corey Alderdice. For over 20 years, my work has lived at the intersection of gifted education, leadership development, and school culture, supporting students as they find their strengths, educators as they stretch their thinking, and schools as they build pathways that expand opportunity. Ready to dive in? Here's this week's Slice. When most people picture dual enrollment in early college programs, they often imagine a fairly specific kind of student. High-achieving, highly motivated, college-bound. Probably already academically successful long before stepping into a college-level classroom. And historically, that image was not entirely accurate. For many years, accelerated coursework largely functioned as an enrichment opportunity for students who were already positioned near the top of traditional academic systems. Advanced placement, international baccalaureate, residential STEM schools, and early college partnerships often drew heavily from students who already had access to strong schools, family support, and college-going cultures. But one of the reasons the modern dual enrollment movement has expanded so rapidly is because policymakers, educators, and researchers increasingly began seeing something much larger within it. Not simply acceleration for already advanced students, but a potential strategy for expanding opportunity itself. And as I've worked through this summer school series, College Before College, I think that possibility may actually be one of the most important parts of the overall conversation. Because buried within all of the debates about rigor, accumulation, optimization, momentum metrics, and the future of higher education is another deeper, more important question. Who actually benefits from acceleration? Now, the question came back into focus for me while reading the recent Community College Research Center report that we discussed in the last episode. One of the most interesting findings from the study was that some of the strongest gains associated with dual enrollment appeared from students who historically have been underserved by traditional educational systems. Okay, let's break that down a bit. In several states, students from Title I schools showed particularly strong enrollment and completion gains connected to dual enrollment participation. The report also pointed toward important differences across student populations, geographic context, and educational pathways. And honestly, that aligns closely with what many educators working in talent development have observed for years. Opportunity often changes trajectories long before it changes statistics. Now, I think people sometimes misunderstand acceleration because they assume it's a fundamental topic focused around speed. But at its best, acceleration is not really about moving students through systems faster. It's about allowing students access to environments, expectations, and possibilities that might otherwise remain unavailable to them. For a student in a well-resourced suburban district with extensive AP offerings, private tutoring, summer enrichment, college counseling, and generations of family familiarity with higher education, dual enrollment may represent one more advanced opportunity among many. But for a rural student attending a small high school with limited advanced coursework, dual enrollment can fundamentally alter what feels imaginable. For a first-generation college student, completing a successful college course while still in high school may quietly dismantle years of uncertainty about belonging. For a student from a lower-income family, accumulating transferable credits may not simply represent efficiency. It may create the financial breathing room that makes a bachelor's degree realistically attainable in the first place. And for some gifted students whose schools cannot fully meet their academic needs locally, acceleration may be the difference between disengagement and intellectual challenge. So those distinctions matter because educational conversations sometimes flatten acceleration into a caricature of sorts. Critics may frame dual enrollment primarily as resume building for affluent students trying to gain a competitive advantage, while advocates sometimes oversell acceleration as a universal solution to every educational challenge. But the reality is more complicated than either narrative. Acceleration can absolutely reinforce inequality if access remains uneven. Students in affluent districts often still have broader access to qualified instructors, advising systems, transportation, technology, and institutional partnerships. Families with greater social capital are frequently better positioned to navigate complicated transfer systems and pathway decisions. And if policymakers focus only on participation numbers without examining who participates and who benefits, gaps can widen rather than narrow. But the opposite can also be true. When designed intentionally, acceleration can become one of the most powerful talent development and opportunity expansion tools within public education. And I think that's particularly important in conversations about giftedness and advanced learning because too often we still associate talent primarily with visibility. Students who are already high-performing become easier to identify, easier to support, and easier to accelerate. But meanwhile, students with substantial potential but fewer prior opportunities often remain overlooked. Now, one of the things I've long believed is that talent is distributed much more broadly than opportunity. And dual enrollment at its best has the capacity to help bridge some of that gap. But doing so requires much more than simply offering college courses. Students need advising, they need encouragement, they need support structures, adults who help them navigate uncertainty, and institutions willing to believe in their capacity before the student believes it themselves. Because access without support can easily become another form of inequality. So a student who enrolls in dual enrollment coursework without preparation guidance or institutional scaffolding may not experience acceleration as empowerment at all. They may experience it as isolation or failure. And that's one reason the NASEP report we discussed earlier in the series focused so heavily on quality and coherence rather than participation alone. The strongest acceleration systems are rarely the ones most obsessed with raw numbers. They're the ones that most intentionally think about pathways and support. And I think that idea becomes especially important as states increasingly push acceleration into the mainstream. Once acceleration stops being exceptional and becomes normalized, the responsibility shifts. Educational systems can no longer simply celebrate access. They have to think carefully about design. Who receives information? Who gets encouraged to participate? Whose credits transfer cleanly and how? Who has transportation access? Who receives advising? Which students feel like these opportunities belong to them? And which students quietly self-select out before they even begin? You see, those questions often matter more than the existence of the program itself. One of the things I sometimes worry about in educational policy is that we underestimate how powerfully institution culture shapes student behavior. Students are constantly reading signals about where they belong and what futures feel accessible to them. A single successful dual enrollment experience can sometimes alter a student's internal narrative in ways that are difficult to measure but are enormously consequential. A student begins seeing themselves differently. A family begins seeing college differently. A teacher recognizes potential that had previously gone unnoticed. A pathway that once felt abstract suddenly becomes real. And while policymakers understandably focus on completion metrics and workforce outcomes, those moments of expanded possibility may ultimately be just as important. So that's why I think the future of acceleration cannot simply be built around efficiency or labor market alignment alone. And granted, those things matter, but they are incomplete by themselves. The deeper promise of acceleration is not merely faster credential attainment. It is broader human possibility. Done poorly, acceleration can absolutely become another mechanism through which already advantaged students pull further ahead. But done thoughtfully, it can become a way of helping students encounter futures they might never have otherwise imagined for themselves. And that distinction may ultimately determine whether this era of college before college becomes one of the most democratizing educational shifts in the modern era, or simply another sorting mechanism layered onto existing inequalities. I suspect the answer will depend less on whether dual enrollment expands and more on how intentionally schools, colleges, and states themselves choose to build the systems surrounding it. Because opportunity is rarely created by access alone. Opportunity emerges when access is paired with support, belief, guidance, challenge, and sustained institutional commitment to helping students grow into possibilities they may not yet fully see in themselves. And perhaps that's the best possible version of acceleration. Not simply helping students move faster through systems, but helping more students discover that those systems were meant for them in the first place. A Slice with Dice is a production of Aldercube. Thanks for making time to reflect with me. If you're finding value in these episodes, I hope you'll subscribe and help spread the word. Until next time, lead boldly, listen closely, and keep pushing forward. I'll see you then.